Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Jan Black. According to the Centers for Disease Control, over 20% of the adult population in the United States suffers from chronic pain. It's estimated that between 11 million and 20 million Americans suffer from pain that is so severe it frequently limits their work or life activities. Sarah Ann Shockley is one of those with chronic pain. She's lived with debilitating nerve pain since 2007. She felt isolated and alone and wished she'd had a guide to living with more ease in the midst of pain and ultimately relieving the pain. She ended up writing such a book herself, which provides practical advice for living with chronic pain and for relieving suffering on mental, emotional, and physical levels. The book is called The Pain Companion: Everyday Wisdom for Living with and Moving Beyond Chronic Pain. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jan. I'm delighted to be here.
You've lived with chronic pain since 2007. What happened?
Yeah. Oh, well, I was working for someone privately in a very non-ergonomic office setup, and I contracted something called thoracic outlet syndrome, which unfortunately is becoming more and more prevalent. It's a collapse of between the clavicles, the collarbones, and the first rib. So it's a structural collapse in the body that can come about from too much computer use. Non-ergonomic, really not set up well. So I was working on a computer that was too small for me. The keyboard was way too small. I'm about 6 feet tall, and the top of my body was collapsing unbeknownst to me all the time that I was working. And it's something for everyone to be really aware of. And what happens is that those two bone structures collapse in on each other, and unfortunately what's going on there is there's a lot of there's nerve ganglia, there's a large muscle from the neck that goes through there's veins and arteries, so all of that gets squeezed and compressed. It's extremely painful, and it's very debilitating. It goes into the arms and hands, it goes up into the neck and into the head, and eventually it goes down through the whole body to the feet. So a lot of nerve pain, muscle pain, aches, shooting pains, and also loss of mobility. So that happened in 2007, as we mentioned, and I've been working with it and living with it ever since.
And why did you decide to write this book?
Well, I started out not thinking about writing a book. I was in a lot of pain and unable to do much. I couldn't use the computer anymore. I could barely hold a pen. But I was going through a lot of emotional problems with, how was I going to live with this? The pain wasn't going away. After a year, it became clear to me that I wasn't coming out of it. When we first meet things like this, and we have a condition or an injury, an accident, an illness, whatever it is, we imagine it's just going to heal. That's what happens. You have the flu and you get better. You break your leg and it heals. And so I thought for the first year that this was going away, and it didn't. And finally, one of my doctors said, Sarah, it's not going to go away. And you're going to be looking at living with this for the rest of your life, and it could even get worse. So that sent me to kind of spiraling downward emotionally, as you can imagine. And anybody that gets that kind of prognosis has to face the intense emotional responses to, what do I do with that? What do I do with that news? And this is a long answer to your question, but it is what happened is I finally thought, I can't live just sitting here in pain all the time. I can't deal with that. I have to find a way through this. And nothing that I was offered really helped. My condition is very unusual in that whatever I did physically tended to make it worse. It didn't lend itself to physical therapy. It didn't lend itself to any kind of manipulation or chiropractic work. The tissues get more swollen and the nerves get more inflamed the more you try to help it. So I was kind of left with not much to work with. And I thought, I don't know. I've journaled through emotional issues before. Maybe I can sort of write the pain out of my body. Kind of a strange thought, since writing was also painful. It was hard for me to hold a pen, but I was down to nothing. So I started very slowly and painfully just writing down how I felt about living with pain, what it had done to me and how I felt it had invaded my life and taken over. And a lot of the first writing was very much kind of spewing out, those deep feelings of loss and sadness and blame and shame and all of the things that come up when you live with pain for a while. And I was a single mom, so there was a lot about not being a good enough mother, not being present enough for my son, not being able to do the things I wanted to do with him. So I couldn't write much at a time because I was in so much pain, but very, very slowly it took a couple of years of just using this as kind of an outlet. I wrote about living with pain, and that evolved from me being in the sense of, ranting about it into more philosophical thoughts about it, into more, how could I be with this differently? So it's kind of evolved into more positive approaches to, here I am. How do I live with this? And from all of that writing and all of those explorations finally I realized, I have something that somebody else might be able to use and benefit from. So that's where the book finally came out of.
Yeah, I know you said that you wrote the book because you wished somebody else had written this kind of a book that would have helped you.
Yes, absolutely. I felt very, very alone and isolated in my pain, and I think a lot of people that are going through this do. It's hard for, people that aren't in pain to understand what it's like. You're living with like a roommate, really a body mate that you didn't ask for. There's this other. It really feels almost like another being in your life. Pain is so intrusive. It's so pervasive. It so dictates what you can and can't do. It's there in everything you do. It's there in all your relationships. It's there when you wake up. It's there when you go to sleep. So it's sometimes difficult to understand that if you haven't lived with pain like that before. But it's a really, really intense experience. And I looked around. I couldn't find anybody really that I could find that was talking about that or writing about that. And when I went to my doctors, and they were all wonderful people and very compassionate, but they didn't get it. They had no clue. It was very much focused on the physiological, what's going on with the body physiologically and what can and can't we do. But there's a whole other world of living with pain around that has to do with the emotional self, your identity, how it affects the rest of your life. And nobody was talking about that. And I felt very, very alone in that.
And I know you say, too, that your book is not meant to replace conventional physical remedies or medications or procedures. So what really is it meant to do?
Well, it really is meant to be, as it says, a pain companion. It's in a sense, a voice for things that are really difficult to articulate a lot of times for people who are living in pain. A lot of people that have read it say, thank you so much for writing this. I could not express that. And it helps, I found that it was really helpful when I looked at my own writing to read it back and mirror back to myself. Oh, wow, this is what I've been going through. This is what's been happening. And in a way to honor my own journey through that. So it's really a way for people to have somebody with them in a sense, even though I'm not physically there, somebody who can see their pain, who can understand the other levels of it that aren't often addressed. And even though that doesn't necessarily seem like that would help the pain itself, it really does ultimately. Because when you feel seen and you feel heard and you feel validated and honored, there is something about that helps, that creates a physiological response too. You begin to relax a little bit. You think, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one who feels like this. I'm not completely alone. And that can begin to lift not only emotionally, but it affects the way we breathe, the way we are with our pain, the way we are with ourselves, kind of lifts a little bit of that sense of shame and aloneness. So it's very much meant to be a companion and a helpmate in a sense.
We thank you so much for joining us on Nobody Told Me. And we have a question for you to think about. Is there something that interferes with your happiness or is preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp Online Counseling is there for you.
BetterHelp allows you to connect with a professional counselor in a safe and private environment. Get help on your own time and at your own pace. You can schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist.
BetterHelp has 3,000 licensed professional counselors in the U.S. who specialize in depression, stress, anxiety, relationships, sleeping, and trauma, anger, family conflicts, LGBT matters, grief, and self-esteem are just some of the issues you might want to discuss.
And of course, anything you share is completely confidential. And if you're not happy with your counselor for any reason, you can request a new one at any time at no additional charge.
BetterHelp is available worldwide, and you can start communicating by text, chat, phone, or video in under 24 hours. Financial aid is available for those who qualify.
It's secure, convenient, and professional. And best of all, it's a truly affordable option. Nobody Told Me listeners get 10% off their first month with discount code NOBODY.
So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/nobody. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you'll love.
That's betterhelp.com/nobody.
And you write that because pain medications and healing protocols work on some kinds of pain, but not ours, we may feel that our chronic condition is a negative reflection on us, that there is something wrong with us for continuing to experience pain. Explain more about that.
Yeah. Our culture is very pain averse, I'd say. I mean, nobody likes pain. Nobody wants to go towards it, but we tend to have a way of thinking about pain as intrinsically wrong and bad, and that we should never have it. So as soon as we meet pain, whether it's physical or emotional, we want it to stop, and that's natural response. I mean, we don't want to live in pain, but sometimes that first that way of perceiving pain as intrinsically bad and negative, when it doesn't go away and it doesn't get fixed instantly, and it takes, it lingers and lingers and lingers, because we think it's not supposed to be here, we're not supposed to have it, that reflects back on us, those of us that have had to live in pain for a while. And often we get this reflected back to us quite overtly, too, by doctors and by others around us. Why are you still in pain? How can you still be in pain that long? Aren't you trying hard enough? Haven't you tried this? Why aren't you doing that? Are you trying to just get attention? You must want to still be in pain. We get all of this negative feedback towards us because our culture says pain isn't supposed to happen. So if we're still in it, something must be wrong with us. We must have done something wrong. We must have failed somewhere. And that's really, really difficult to carry. And another reason why I've written about this is that to say to people, you're not wrong. It's not a mistake. Sometimes we meet pain. All of us are going to meet pain at some point on our path in life. Sometimes it doesn't leave that easily, but that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's some kind of journey that's trying to work itself out. And I feel ultimately there is a positive purpose to it, even though sometimes it's hard to see.
And how do you get yourself into that mindset where you see that there might be a positive purpose, or that at least you could turn it around and look at it a little bit differently?
Well, that's, in a sense, it's almost a discipline of will, and you really do have to work on that. It's not easy, particularly if you're having a really difficult day and you're in a lot of pain. It's really hard to see that there might be something positive to it. So it does take, in a sense, a kind of a working through that in your own mind. And one of the ways we work through that is we usually start out fighting against pain. When we meet it, the first thing we do is we want to end it. And sometimes that works really well and it's over. But sometimes it stays around, is what we're talking about. And we can get in that battle mode with pain when we're fighting to end it. And if that works and it ends the pain, then that's great. But for a lot of us, it just becomes exhausting, this ongoing battle every day. So you kind of have to get to that point within yourself where you say, okay, that's not working for me. That's not ending it, and I'm exhausted, and I'm frustrated, and actually it's making it worse because I'm tense, I'm contracted, I'm feeling that kind of anger and that enmity against it. So for me, what I did was look at, well, how can I, here it is. Pain's already here. I can't get rid of it. I want to, but I can't. So how can I be with it differently? It's not something I want to be with, but how can I kind of make this be a different experience? So for me, it was trying to see, how can I look at pain differently? How can I be with it differently? And instead of sort of this face-off with pain where we're pushing against it, well, okay, what if it has a positive purpose? So it's sort of starting to ask different kinds of questions. what if it's meant to show me something? I mean, it is a signal from the body. It is a kind of in a sense, it's an alarm signal. Hello, I need some attention here. So the kind of attention I'm paying to it, is it the kind of attention that's really helping and healing, or is it that angry kind of push? So kind of starting to ask different questions and beginning to think of pain more as something that is kind of coming along with me rather than something I'm facing off against. So what I find works for me is to try to continually shift those perceptions. And it's an ongoing daily thing. When I meet pain and it's really spiked, I don't like it either. I have to remind myself, oh yeah, this is where I need to stop, take a few breaths, start to work with it differently and kind of relax around it a little bit more, even though that's challenging to do.
You also note that one of the first things we do when we experience pain is draw in a sharp breath and hold it to try to stop the painful sensation. How does breathing affect our pain levels?
Yeah, that's really important. It was a kind of a seemingly small thing and yet turned out to be quite profound. I sort of discovered this for myself when I thought, well, I'm left with not a whole lot I can do physically. I was really in a place where I was extremely limited at the time. And I thought, well, maybe I can meditate, So I thought, I'll sit and I'll start to meditate. Well, sitting in a particular posture with an upright spine for me was extremely painful, so that made it worse. Then trying to just do some deep breathing and begin to, how a lot of meditation focuses on the breath. That made it worse. My pain levels went up. I thought, wow, I can't even meditate. But the process of looking at that made me begin to look at my breath. And, I thought, wow, I can't do deep breathing. Well, how am I breathing? And beginning to notice, oh, I'm breathing really shallowly. Oh, why am I doing that? And just kind of asking myself questions over and over again. Well, what if I did this? Oh, that hurts. Well, why am I doing that? And then noticing during the day how often I was holding my breath, just beginning to put attention on my breath and going, wow, I'm hardly breathing at all. And noticing, oh, well, that's because, as you mentioned, when we meet pain, we often pull back. We pull in the breath. And I thought, why is that? Because we think that if we breathe more deeply, we'll feel it more, which is often true. We don't want to feel it. But by holding the breath all the time, kind of, pulling back on it, breathing very shallowly, we're not really allowing the energy of the breath and the oxygen to move through the body. And of course, we need that to heal. We need to keep things circulating. We need to keep things moving. And we're also often kind of trying to use that held breath. Of course, obviously, we're still breathing. We're not holding it all the time, but we often hold it in and we breathe very, very shallowly. And I noticed for myself, I was almost trying to push the breath against the pain and kind of use it as a wall almost. If I don't let the pain have any breath, then I won't have to feel it. So just kind of trying to keep the breath away from the pain, if that makes any sense at all, which of course is impossible to do, but it's the kind of things that we keep trying to do to mitigate the pain, to not have to feel it. So for me, what I discovered is when I began to look at that and release the pain a little bit, just relax a little bit around it and begin to give pain a little more space to breathe in, which is very counterintuitive. You don't want to, give pain anything. But when we begin to let the breath relax around the pain and also begin to imagine pain breathing with us and us breathing through the pain, it very much begins to, for me and for a lot of people that I've worked with, begins to kind of just around the edges of pain, begins to relax a little bit, and you get a little more breathing room, and then the whole body begins to relax. And all of that has a much more positive healing effect than holding the breath and tightening up.
How important is it to not isolate yourself if you're dealing with chronic pain, even if you don't really feel like going out?
Boy, I'd say that's just paramount. It's extremely easy to do the opposite, to pull in. And of course, that's our first response. Not only do we pull in the breath, we pull ourselves back in from life because we feel bad. And we kind of do that naturally as an initial response when we meet pain, and whether it's an illness or an injury or whatever it is, an ongoing condition, or it's just, I had an operation and I need to kind of pull back in and heal. But and that can be fine because we need to pull away a bit. We need to have our quiet time. We need to heal. But when we're talking about when the pain becomes chronic, we're not getting better, we're not coming out, we can tend to stay in that mode of pulling away to heal and kind of lick our wounds and take care of ourselves almost too much. And we can get into that place where we're waiting for the pain to leave before we re-enter life. And when that goes on for years, we can become extremely isolated, kind of waiting for when it's okay to be part of life again. And for those of us that have to live with pain on an ongoing basis, that's a time we need to really start to look at that, because it can become extremely lonely, very difficult, and it's not really healthy to be isolated all the time, I don't believe. And some of the things we have to learn when we are living with pain is how to reach out again, even while we're still feeling the pain. How do we re-enter life even with pain has to come with us? And that's just a choice we make. How can I be in life? And maybe I have to be in life in smaller ways. Maybe I have to think about if I'm going out to meet friends, I can only go out for half an hour, not the whole evening. But begin to find ways to re-enter life again, because it's part of our healing process too, to find ways to re-engage with life, even if pain kind of has to come with us.
And another thing you do is to encourage people suffering from pain issues to graciously accept help from other people, whether that's financial help or simply helping around the house.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that was hard for me to learn. I've always been very independent, very resourceful. I've always been the one I used to be in management in the corporate world, and I was always the one that made things happen. And being a single mom, I always had to be the one who was in charge and making the money and cooking the meals and doing this and doing that. So when you're used to being the one who handles things, and I think a lot of women are people who are used to making sure things happen. And when you meet something like this that's incapacitating, when you are debilitated, when you have to take care of yourself more, it can be really hard to let go of that identity as the one who doesn't need help. And a lot of times we think we have to push through the pain and keep going anyway. We have to act as if we're normal when we're not normal. We have to carry on because people expect it of us. And I think it's really important to get to the place where we can allow ourselves to ask for help, to let a few important people around us know how hard it is and what we're going through, rather than a lot of us feel like we're supposed to hide our pain. But instead of, doesn't mean we have to run out and tell everybody, but there's certain people around you that really need to know what you need. And they don't know. If we don't tell them, they don't know. I have what we call an invisible disability. It doesn't look like anything from the outside, but it's really hard for me sometimes to just open a door or turn, open a jar or pull a chair out. Can be really hard. But it doesn't look like anything. People wouldn't imagine that I have that problem. So I've had to learn to turn to people and say, "Oh, would you mind pulling that chair out for me?" And you kind of have to get over yourself. It's hard because sometimes it's embarrassing to ask for help when you don't look like you need it. But I've found that most people are really willing to help if you ask politely, and I just kind of encapsulate it in I have a neck injury, which isn't really accurate, but people get it. I just kind of give them a little, phrase that says why I need the help. And I think it's really important because living with pain by itself is exhausting. You don't need to add to it by trying to do everything you used to do. And people around are going to have to adjust. It's hard on them too. They want you to be normal. They want you to be able to do all the things you used to be able to do, and you can't. And that's a conversation that those of us in pain have to kind of take it upon ourselves to have with people around us and with our kids, and say, I'm going to need extra help, and just be willing to ask for it.
What are your thoughts on finding pain support groups to help?
I think it can be really helpful and important. It's easier said than done in some ways. I didn't find that for myself when I was going through the worst of this. There may have been support groups around, but I didn't have the energy to go out and even find them. I didn't feel like talking to people about it. It probably would have been healthier if I had, but I was in the place of I was a single mom. I had to be with my son when he came home from school every day, so I didn't have a lot of extra resources and energy. And even though it sounds like a support group would be giving back to you, it's something you have to go out and find and do and find the time to do. So it's a mixed bag. And I've also heard from people that sometimes, it's people can be a little bit in the victim mode, so you may or may not want to be involved with that. So I would, so it's kind of a mixed answer here. What I do find helps a lot of people is there are online support groups, which are obviously less personal in the sense that they're not right with you, but you can join them and you can work with them on your own when it works for you to do it. You don't have to go out someplace. And those I actually recommend. There, you can just Google your condition or Google chronic pain or Google chronic pain support groups online. And in that way, you can have conversations with people that are going through similar things. And that can be really helpful. And you don't have to necessarily go out at a certain time or go be with people if you don't have the energy for that. So I would highly recommend that. And it can be really helpful to hear what other people are going through that have similar conditions as you do.
How effective can animals be in supporting us when we're in pain?
Well, I think that it's really important to have somebody to tell your story to. That's one of the things I talk about. And sometimes animals are fantastic listeners because, it sounds like, well, how would that do you any good? But there is something about having something there that's alive that won't animals don't turn back to you and say, but have you tried this? Or why aren't you doing that? They just are there with you. And I think that they can be incredible helpfulness for solace and for companionship. And again, to talk to them. I would just talk to them. And if you don't have an animal, go out in nature and talk to nature or talk to God or talk to whoever or whatever you can find that feels alive to you. I think it's important that it's something that feels alive, that it's listening, that it's hearing you, even if it doesn't, even if it isn't human and that they don't necessarily understand exactly what you're saying. Animals are amazing in their ability to empathize and be there and just, feel with you. And I think that's really important. So you don't feel so alone and you have a sense of somebody hears me, somebody sees me.
Yeah, I know you're a big advocate in terms of getting outside to help you cope with pain. And you also encourage people suffering from pain to use art to help them cope. Explain more about that.
Yeah, I think I certainly found it personally true, and I think it's true for a lot of people that, as I've mentioned earlier, we think we're not supposed to talk about our pain. We're not supposed to show it. We're in a culture that says, no, this isn't supposed to happen. So we tend to hide it. We hide it sometimes even from ourselves. It's considered a burden if we tell other people about it. But I really feel that it's extremely important to express what's going on and express how you feel about it. What is it doing to you? It feels sort of like pain is doing something to us, and how is that, and how is it affecting our lives? And I think it's extremely important to have some kind of outlet for that, whether it is using artistic expression, drawing, painting. If you can move that way, dancing can be good. Writing, as we talked about earlier, any way of finding a way to express what's going on for you, it's extremely helpful. And it may not sound like it would be. It may sound like a small thing, but part of, I feel, what keeps pain in place is that we feel like we have to hide it. We feel like we have to cover it up. We aren't allowed to in our culture to express it much. So that, to me, helps lock it in place, which is not healthy. So when we begin to express how we feel about it, when we begin to express what it means to us, and maybe begin to ask those questions, well, if pain were doing this painting, if pain were going to do some little writing, what would pain look like? What would pain have to say? What would pain paint? And let your pain begin to express too through whatever these creative mediums are. And that begins to just loosen it up and let it begin to flow. And and it starts to have a healing effect.
And you say that pain brings with it many unforeseen and unacknowledged gifts. Like what?
Well, it's hard to accept them at first, but when you look at, wow, how have I had to change? What has pain asked me to do here? What have I had to do to be able to get through this? You come to find out that, wow, okay, I had to learn to slow down, which is for a lot of us healthier. We're in this very go 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 culture where we just keep going, keep going, keep going. And sometimes I think pain comes into our lives to point out that maybe it's time to stop being so push, 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 go, go, go. It isn't the maybe it's not the way we would prefer it to show up, that message,
Mhm.
but maybe that message has been trying to come through for a while and we haven't been listening. So pain in a sense is a very hard taskmaster. It's a very hard mentor to have in life. But it does bring some lessons that are really valuable that you can keep with you even after you move beyond the worst of the pain or move beyond pain entirely. And pain has taught me what my priorities are or should be. It really focuses your life down to a couple of things. You might be able to do one or two things in a day when you're in a lot of pain, and you have to decide what those one or two things are going to be. And you begin to realize, to really appreciate your relationships with your children, with your family, with people that you love, and you kind of weed out the ones that aren't helpful and working for you. So it brings your life into sharper focus, even though, again, it's not necessarily the way we'd want to have to go through this. We do learn to appreciate when we have a day that is less painful. You begin to appreciate your body. You begin to appreciate that you can breathe. You can begin to appreciate that you can move. And all of the things that you've done in life that you enjoyed so much that you took for granted, like even just mundane things like brushing your teeth. When it becomes painful, you begin to appreciate all of the little things that you took for granted. So you can turn that around instead of making that about loss and, oh, how awful that I don't have that anymore. You turn it around and you say, okay, what can I still enjoy? What is still here? How can I look for these little things that I used to take for granted and actually, revel in them and go, yeah, this tastes so good. Or this moment with my son is so precious to me because I'm still here on the planet. Even though I'm in pain, I'm still here. And he's still here. And we're together and we love each other. So for me, it just brings everything much more richly into the present moment and teaches you to appreciate and to be here and to enjoy the life that you do have.
And Sarah, our show is called Nobody Told Me. And along the lines of what you were just saying, we always ask our guests, what's your nobody told me lesson? So what is it that you have learned in this journey with pain that nobody could have told you?
Wow, I think probably what we were just talking about, I think certainly nobody would have told me that this would ever happen to me. That's for one thing. I certainly wouldn't have believed it. I've been somebody who believed that I could just get through anything and handle it and come out the other side. And having to live through something this challenging, I wouldn't have believed that would have ever happened. But also the richness of it and the learning and it's been kind of like I would call it like an underworld journey of the soul, where you go down in the underworld, you have to work with the demons there and meet the fears and meet all of the things that sadness and the loss that comes up. And who would have known that all of that was there to be met through this journey through pain? We think of it mostly as a physical thing, but there's this really an intense spiritual journey that you're put on to come out if you're going to come through it and come out the other side. And the fact that there are different ways to be with pain, whether it's emotional or physical, there's a whole world of ways of being with it. It's not just this is bad and, it's either good or it's bad, it's on or it's off. There's just a whole range of ways to be with the difficulties that we meet in life, and which means there's a whole range of being with all of life. So I would not have ever known that I would have come to know myself so much better through this kind of difficult journey.
And Sarah, how can people connect with you on the internet and on social media?
Well, I have a website. It's www.thepaincompanion.com. So people can find me there. I have a blog that I write regularly, and they're welcome to subscribe to that. I have a YouTube channel also called The Pain Companion. I do little 1-minute sort of meditative videos for people in pain, and sometimes I do a little bit longer videos about living with pain. So those are two good ways to connect with me. And I'm also on Facebook, and it's also The Pain Companion, so easy to remember all those things. And I'm always happy to hear from listeners, so feel free to connect. I have a contact page on my website.
Great, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. I'm delighted to be here.
Again, our thanks to Sarah Ann Shockley, whose book is called The Pain Companion, Everyday Wisdom for Living with and Moving Beyond Chronic Pain. I'm Jan Black. You're listening to Nobody Told Me. Thank you so much for joining us.